Hi there, I am Monica Burns, and welcome to the new Easy EdTech podcast episode. As a former New York City public school teacher and current EdTech consultant, I started this podcast in 2019 to share my favorite classroom tech integration tips and stories from my experiences. Each episode offers practical ideas for you to try, share, or save for later. Be sure to check out classtechtips.com/podcast for today's show notes and resources. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or another favorite podcast app, you'll find the show notes link in the description too. This episode is sponsored by my new free ebook on ChatGPT. It's called 60 Plus Must-Try ChatGPT Prompts for Teachers, and it's full of ideas that will save you oodles of time. To grab the free ebook, go to classtechtips.com/chatgptbook. That's my website, classtechtips.com, and add a /chatgptbook. You can also find the link in the description of this episode or by tapping on the free stuff button on my website, classtechtips.com. This week's episode is titled How to Check for Understanding When Sharing Videos with Students. So let me ask you a question. How do you check for understanding when using videos in your classroom? The use of videos in the classroom has become so popular as a teaching tool. Whether you find videos from YouTube, BrainPop, Flocabulary, or another favorite source, we know that sharing a video with students is so much more than pressing play. In today's episode, we'll explore how to check for understanding when sharing videos with students, and of course, I'll mention some favorite EdTech tools you can use along the way. Videos offer a wealth of educational content, from explainer videos and tutorials to step-by-step guides and simulations. This type of media can engage and educate students in a way that supplements traditional teaching methods. Asking questions before, during, and after watching a video can ensure that students truly grasp the different layers of information presented in this format. When you're thinking about creating a learning experience for students with videos, you'll want to ask questions throughout the process, whether you're all together, turning and talking, or students are working on their own to explore a video and come back a bit later to let you know what they learned. After you've developed questions to ask students, you'll want to decide when the best time to ask these questions is. Is it before, during, or after watching a video? You'll want to choose how you'll get the questions to students and how they will respond. Here are a few ways to give students questions to answer and gather their responses. The first tip on today's list is to embed questions right into the video. So as students press play, they will see questions periodically throughout the video. You might use an EdTech tool like Edpuzzle or Nearpod, where you can add questions directly into a video. Edpuzzle lets you upload your own video or use a YouTube video and add questions at different places within the video. If you've joined me sometime this year or last year even for a session on curation in the classroom or formative assessment, two topics I'm often asked to come to different conferences or districts to talk about, well, then you might have seen a demo of what this looks like in action. I love showing off how to embed questions into a video because I think it's a fantastic formative assessment strategy. Nearpod, just like Edpuzzle, also lets you add questions to a video, and I'll include a link in the show notes for today's episode where you can see this process in action. I've got a YouTube video from the folks at Nearpod that show you how to go through the process. So a quick note about this tip: embedding questions into a video is a great option if students are watching independently, like in a station rotation, in a blended learning model, or even a flipped classroom where they're watching this outside of the instructional time. The next tip on the list is to pause for a turn and talk. So if you're sharing a video with students on the big screen in your classroom, that's like what I like to call the interactive whiteboard or projector screen, then you might use questions like the ones that I've put together in a corresponding blog post. I'll link out to some here. So you might ask questions as part of a turn and talk. So a turn and talk is essentially an opportunity for students to turn to a partner and talk or discuss the question that you posed together. While this is happening live, everyone's in the classroom together, well, then you might circulate and listen in to conversations while this is happening. Then students might share some of their observations, some of the things that their answers are to the questions that you asked them, or you might just share kind of a summary of what you've heard. So a turn and talk is perfect if everyone is watching together at the same time. The number 3 on our list of tips for how to check for understanding when sharing videos with your students is to use a stop and jot to respond. A stop and jot is an excellent way for kids to actively process what they've experienced when watching a video. You might do this for a whole class or a small group interaction while they're watching video content. So first you'd pause the video and give them a question. Then you would ask students to respond by jotting down a few ideas on a sheet of paper or posting their response into a digital space. This might follow up with a turn and talk, but that stop and jot is that prep. It's the moment for them to pause and write down some of the things that they're thinking about. You could even take a spin on this idea and make a sketchnoting connection. I'll link to a couple of sketchnoting resources in the show notes for today. Another interactive opportunity to engage with content and check for understanding at the same time is to have kids respond on video themselves. So instead of jotting something down or posting in a discussion forum, they would jump on video too and respond. So if students are watching videos, say they're independently watching these in a station rotation or maybe even a whole class, you might consider incorporating a video response. Many tools have video recording options built right into them, including popular EdTech tools like Seesaw and Microsoft Flip, formerly Flipgrid, where you can pose a question to students, you can put it for them there, and then have them respond by getting on camera and using one of these tools to record their response. This is a great option if you're using this question or prompt like an exit ticket at the end of the lesson where kids can reflect on what they've watched. So the last tip on the list today is one that you might use to check for understanding when sharing videos with students. And you do this maybe as part of a regular routine, and you might even connect it to something that kids do in a journal space. So using questions as a journal prompt as a way for kids to respond to what they have watched. So if you'd like to give students many different ways to respond, you could try out an interactive journaling tool, a tool that gives them a few different buttons to press or a few different ways for them to capture their learning. This could include something like OneNote or Book Creator. Both of these are tools that let students respond in multiple ways. And just like the folks at Nearpod that I've done some work with in the past, Book Creator is one that I love and I've done some work with their team. Depending on when you're listening to this, you might even catch me at their ISTE booth this year. So both of these tools let students respond in more than one way. They have a choice. So for example, students might use the voice to text option to dictate their response, or they could use an audio option and record their voice. Book Creator even has a generate transcript option, which is a great thing for kids to do because then you can either press play and listen to their voice, or you can skim and look at the text version of their audio response. So if you want students to really share what they have learned while watching a video, or you have a specific question that relates back to what you're checking for understanding, an interactive journal is a great option. So adding questions to a video, no matter how you choose to do it, is a valuable way for engaging students and encouraging critical thinking too. You can follow and use any of the tips from today's episode, maybe choose just one to get started. And this can really give students a deeper viewing experience and you a more complete, a more full picture of what they understand and where they need a little bit more help. So let's make this EdTech easy with the key points from this episode. Embed questions into a video. Pause for a turn and talk. Use a stop and jot to respond. Ask students to respond on video, and use questions as a journal prompt. Remember, you can find the show notes and a list of resources. I've got a bunch of links for you to explore from today's episode by going to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode, number 217. This episode is sponsored by my new free ebook on ChatGPT. It's called 60 Plus Must-Try ChatGPT Prompts for Teachers, and it's full of ideas that will save you oodles of time. To grab the free ebook, go to classtechtips.com/ChatGPT book. That's my website, classtechtips.com, and add a /ChatGPT book. You can also find the link in the description of this episode or by tapping on the free stuff button on my website, classtechtips.com. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday edition of the Easy EdTech podcast. Remember to hit follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite app to have next week's episode ready for you on Tuesday morning. Feel free to share takeaways from this episode with friends or colleagues in a quick email or text, or even on social media. And don't hesitate to tag me at Class Tech Tips if you have any questions.